Ladies and gentlemen, the Formula One US Grand Prix in COTA was awesome, in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, the start, the first, 25, 30 laps or so were a little bit boring. The pack was getting stretched out that little bit. But after that first safety car, it was amazing. Everything was happening. People were coming from behind. You were seeing crashes. We saw people who you didn't expect to be in those positions getting up there. I'll go through some of the examples of that in a moment. But I really, really enjoyed it. Reminiscent a bit more of last year with Hamilton and Verstappen at the top, fighting out for the position in the last few laps there. So that was something that was going to be a bit more unexpected for the day. And then obviously there was a lot of stuff coming from behind as well, which really spiced up the mid-pack going into these last three races of the year. We'll start with the actual safety car part. So we had two safety cars. I believe it's the first time there's been a safety car in COTA since around 2015, if our memory serves me right, from hearing the commentary over the weekend. So we had two in a row. So the first one, it was Valtteri Bottas, of all people in Alfa Romeo, who started it all. He was just driving on his own, wasn't competing with anyone at the time, not fighting, and he literally just span off, got stuck in a gravel trap, and they had to bring out the safety car. And Formula One, obviously, with everything that happened in Japan, with the worried about getting tractors on the track and so on, they were extra cautious, slowed the whole pack down properly, bunched everyone together as they should. And then obviously we took a little while to get Bottas's car out of the way. They restarted again after a few laps. And that after the restart, I believe it was about one lap or so after the restart, we had a big crash between Alonso and Stroll. Alonso was following Stroll, and as he went kind of starting to overtake him, Stroll veered to the left slightly. I don't believe there was any penalties actually given for this, because maybe he wasn't completely wrong for doing it. But it obviously did turn out to be a very dangerous thing. Alonso rammed into the back of him. They touched wheels. Alonso took flight. The whole front end of the car lifted up for several meters in front. It looked like he was going to be taken out to outer space, and it was quite lucky. It was reminiscent of seeing what happened to Mark Webber in the Red Bull several years ago. We got launched and the car completely flipped. Luckily, for Alonso's case, the car didn't actually flip over, but he launched straight up and then swerved and went straight into the barriers. Amazingly, though, obviously we saw that Stroll's car was completely written off. He was completely out of the race. But Fernando Alonso's car literally just had, it seemed just like some tyre damage. He managed to pit and then finished 7th in the Grand Prix. I couldn't believe it. Unfortunate for Alonso, he got some other penalties later on, which because I believe Haas had actually put in a protest after the Grand Prix, saying that Alonso's, I believe for him it was his right wing mirror was loose and had fallen off in the Grand Prix, and they knew it was loose. They didn't take him in, they didn't take it off. You could see it flailing about there, and they really they should have pitted him. Alpine, but they didn't. It just let it fall off, and then Haas protested at the end, which saying it was dangerous. He got then a 30-second penalty, which brought him right the way back down the grid. But well done, Alonso, for at least carrying on with the race after what happened to him. And I can imagine it was probably a pretty big shock and a bit of a jolt in his spine and on his arse after he landed after hitting the floor like that in these cars, which I'm sure have very little given them at all. So yeah, that was what really started off all the cool shit that happened in the race. One notable mention as well, Leclerc. Leclerc actually put it on second in qualifying. But due to, I believe it was, I can't remember the exact penalty, but he had a penalty which was bringing him back down to 12th place on the grid. So he was starting from 12th, and he ended up being third at the end of the Grand Prix. So he made his way through the field, did really well to get there and keep up. Leclerc, as usual, was being really down on himself and saying it wasn't good enough and so on. But I think most people were pretty impressed that he managed to do that from 12th to 3rd in the Ferrari. Carlos Sainz, unfortunately, got tagged from George Russell at the start of the Grand Prix, which wiped him out of the race, damaged George's car a little bit, which probably contributed to his lack of performance through the rest of the Grand Prix. I don't believe it was anyone's particular fault. Sainz did come across a little bit on that first corner. He was technically on the racing line, and George was braking a little later, but it was a first corner incident with everyone piling into it. I don't think either driver could really be blamed for that. One of the other big noticeable mentions, which was one of my favourite parts of the Grand Prix, was seeing what Sebastian Vettel did. Seb qualified in 12th. I believe he must have started a place up then from 11th after Leclerc got relegated. But he ended up 7th overall in the Grand Prix, and he was 8th right until that last few corners of the Grand Prix, where he was taken on Kevin Magnussen, who was on older tyres, and Vettel knew that, and it was so cool seeing him dart back and forth. And trying to overtake Magnussen, and you thought he was going to do it, and he had to dive bomb a couple of times, and he managed to finally make it on the last couple of corners, and that puts Seb up into 7th place, which was really crucial actually for the Constructors' Championship. It's helped actually Aston Martin. They're only, I believe, are now 1 point behind now, to moving up to 7th place. So they're doing really, surprisingly, they've been doing really well towards the end of this season, when Aston Martin had been lacking throughout the rest of the season there. So I don't think anyone really expected to really see much from Aston Martin towards the end of the season, but they really have picked up the pace. Where are we next? Of course. So obviously we had Max and Verstappen. Max and Verstappen, Lewis and Verstappen, fighting it out at the front. We actually even saw Sebastian Vettel and Lewis battle it out for just a second. Seb was actually leading the race at one point, which everyone, I think, was shocked about. Everyone was in love with, until it was just on that first main straight, and Hamilton had the DRS open and managed to get straight past him. So it was great to see how well Seb did, but then it was great to see the Hamilton versus Verstappen battle again. This all happened because Verstappen had a pit stop that was more than 11 seconds long. They couldn't get a wheel nut on or off, and that caused havoc in the Grand Prix there, because everyone suddenly thought, oh Christ, it's on now. Hamilton could actually win this, and I did think he possibly could, but you saw how quickly Verstappen was coming back at him. He destroyed that deficit within only around 10 laps or something. I managed to get Hamilton a couple of laps before the end, and then just kind of still strive ahead slightly. So it's well deserved for Max's win. And then obviously congratulations to Red Bull, who actually ended up winning the Constructors' Championship this weekend. We weren't always 100% sure it was going to go, but obviously with Sainz going out of the Grand Prix and not collecting many points there, and then both Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen doing well in the Grand Prix, they managed to get enough points to secure the Constructors' Championship. It was a real shame as well to see Dietrich Mateschitz hear of his passing. He wasn't a guy that most people knew him by name, but never really seen him, because he didn't really turn up to the Grand Prix. He was a really quiet guy. Didn't like the cameras, but he did an awful lot for a lot of young drivers, and obviously promoting the Red Bull brand throughout the world, and all the cool stuff that he's actually kind of essentially given an education to the rest of the world in how to market a product, and he did it while doing all stuff that he thought was cool. So yeah, it's a real shame to put a bit of a downer for Red Bull in that respect, but I think it gave him kind of that little extra push as well for this weekend. So yeah, it was as we said, it was a really cool race. Lots of stuff happening there. It's now going to be coming down to just 3 more races now. So next weekend we've got coming up the Mexico Grand Prix. I believe we've got a break in between, then Brazil, and then we're going to be going to Abu Dhabi for the finale. So obviously we know that the top spot has been taken, but it's still really close between all the other teams. Even Mercedes have a chance of beating Ferrari in the constructors still. There's a little bit more of a gap there, but everything behind that, the gap is very little. I believe it's only about 6 or 7 points between McLaren and Alpine, and then at the moment, as I said, it's only 1 point between Aston Martin and Alfa for that 6th place spot, with Aston just 1 point behind Alfa now. Alfa had a great start to the season, but have done poorly over the second half, whereas Aston have obviously crept back up again. So yeah, all to play for still in the mid-pack and for 2nd, 3rd, 4th place, and it's been obviously a really enjoyable Grand Prix. if you like listening to me, follow, like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.